Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Windows on the World. We are going to have a life review and a COVID year review tonight. So, welcome to the show. Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday, 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net. Yeah, just looking back at the year, and quite interesting. All the shows we've done have kind of linked together, and I'm really happy with the way that Windows on the World has analysed what's going on during the year. It's been very interesting, to say the least. A lot of the stuff we were talking about 5 to 10 years ago has all come into fruition and been accelerated through the COVID-19 Global Action Plan. We've talked about a lot of things this year, but one of the funniest things recently was inclusive capitalism. Yes, this is actually coming from the Vatican. Let's just see what it said. We're just reviewing a few things here. We consider that inclusive capitalism is fundamentally about creating long-term value for all stakeholders, and this is meant to be a religious organisation. Businesses, governments and communities guided by an approach that provides a, guess what, equality of opportunity. Yes, the big communitarian, big society, well, nobody will be left behind. For all people to pursue prosperity and quality of life, irrespective of criteria such as socio-economic background, gender, equitable outcomes for those who have the same opportunities and seize them in the same way. In other words, yes, going into the hive mind of which we've talked for a very long time, equality of opportunity, fairness across generations, which means poverty for all, in case you didn't know, so that one generation does not overburden the planet or realise near-term benefits that incur long-term costs at the cost of future generations. Now, we have covered this on a previous show, but I think it's very important because this is exactly what Agenda 21, yes, the big conspiracy theory that's been rolled out all over the world through the COVID action plan, actually said. It was all about preserving the planet for future generations and not impacting on the rights and the conditions of which those people in the future were going to have to live. In other words, you have a responsibility, you have rights and responsibilities, and your inalienable rights will be absolutely curtailed through the new system of communitarianism, where, guess what? Yeah, COVID Action Plan works brilliantly because, hey, are you an anti-vaxxer or are you an anti-masker? Why are you so full of hate? I suppose you support Trump, don't you? I suppose you think that Brexit was a good idea. I suppose you think that Elvis lives on the dark side of the moon. Yes, this is a life review of everything we've been doing over the past 12 months in a way. Let's carry on with this. Fairness to those in society. That sounds good, doesn't it? Fairness to those in society whose circumstances prevent them from full economic participation in the economy. Well, that has to be everyone now, doesn't it? Well, we are all in the same boat and nobody will be left behind. The COVID scenario for future management by technocratic tyrants is so full of holes it is only relying on public participation through this big communitarian lie and action plan. We are all in it together, no one will be left behind. One of our recent shows was actually called When Technocracy Fails, which is what I wanted to get onto next, because technocracy can only work in the minds of technocrats, because not everybody is going to be predictable and not everybody is going to be monitored through artificial intelligence and be predictable. And that is something that I keep reiterating over and over again. So in other words, if you step outside the accepted corridor of opinion and actually are able to bypass and get in front of things that are coming your way, then there's not a lot this system can do apart from the E word, which is, of course, enforcement. Yes, when technocracy fails, it seems to fail as it makes no logical sense. It only works in the minds of the technocrats. In our show on the global coup, it was made clear the limits to argument are included in the limits to the accepted language and the accepted narrow corridor of public opinion. Everything outside is defined as hate or conspiracy theory. It's very simple and in a way too simple. Take everything down to a simplistic soundbite, the for and against, the two classic lies. In other words, for and against have got nothing to do with it. The actual agenda is being driven through the middle of all that. The extremes are irrelevant as the steering method will take both sides where it's meant to go. That is, unless there is consideration of the methods used, and that's where we get into law. In the present time, though, there isn't consideration with what they're doing. They are trying to use this three things of engage. What's the other one? Enforce is the first, it's the third one, I think, but engage and enforce is the third one. Can't remember what it is. Can you remember? No. Sorry, I've got Eddie with me. Eddie from Kentish Town is here.
Useless Eddie.
Yeah. Well, actually, you've been quite good at fighting off the cycling lobby, but we'll get to that in a bit. The extremes are irrelevant as the steering method will take both sides where it's meant to go. That is, unless there is consideration. Indeed, well, there isn't much consideration going on, which means there is no law, because, in other words, you have to consent and you have to give your consent to what's going on, especially if things are being done on your behalf. The two lies the public are placed between can be used for everything, for or anti-vax, mask or no mask. This obfuscates the real point and is an attempt to hide the evidence under, yes, moralising. Well, this is the communitarian way, the simple emotional argument for simpletons. Will this new system work, though? That's the question. It is already clear that the commercial side of technocracy leaves itself open to basic corruption and black marketeering. Very interesting. For instance, the deregulation of the rollout of even the PCR test is laughable. This is quite funny because there are these little backstreet companies in industrial estates giving you these COVID certificates to fly, and you can only imagine what goes on inside them. And it's only a matter of time before we get some nice knocked-off certificate of vaccine ID certificates, because that's the way it's going to go, because everything's corporate. It's going to be corrupt. It's already corrupt. So if you've got lies built on lies and lies built on fraud, then you can only have corruption, and that can be a good thing, because that means that we can bribe public officials again. Excellent news. Can't wait for that, because that would restore law and order. If we could bribe the police, we would live in a much better society, in my opinion. Again, this takes us into what the globalists think they have planned for a long time. Those demonised by the state, and in turn the public, will be made to act in the common interest, you see. People get demonised by the state, and the public are then made to act in the common interest. Having gone over this on previous shows, it exposes a big idea. The idea that the whole of this fourth industrial revolution rests and relies on a very high level of compliance, which is where we come back to the communitarian idea, which means that we all have to appear to have agreed. And when we appear to have agreed, it's called a consensus. Yeah, the idea that the whole of this fourth industrial revolution relies on a high level of compliance. That is such a key point. This is why the country is being gaslighted into tiers, tier 4, tier 3, tier 2. Well, guess what? When you get in your car, which I know is a capital offence because you should be walking and cycling, even according to Transport for London, if you say, oh, I want to get a train somewhere, the answer phone message comes on, we'd prefer you to walk or cycle. What sort of business would do that? Tier 4, same as any other tier when you're on the open road. Oh, how do I know that? Have I been breaking the tier rules? I don't know. That's for you to find out and me to know. The curious may well be aware that what is being stated as COVID fact is in fact COVID fantasy, aimed solely at testing compliance. Can the public and change agents completely form a global technocratic consensus? Well, that was a question. Can they actually do it? This is the question which the techno-rats fear the most, in my opinion. There cannot be acceptance without consideration. This is such an important point, because if there's no consideration, there's no contract, and if there's no contract, then there is no agreement. So, in other words, what we have is a tyranny. The things that are being imposed on the back of lies and fraud at the moment have to be ignored, because they are not lawful.
And I don't even have to have common law Malcolm to tell me that, because we're talking about basic points of law here. So yeah, the UK currently has no law, as the system of law relies on consent and individual choice. Forcing compliance through guilt, shaming and fear does not cut it. This is what happens when there is no rule of law. So currently, in the UK, there is no rule of law. Authority sees fit to enforce matters which are not law. Law and guidance have been mixed up and used for tyrannical effect. Let's have a look at the definition of consent. We brought this out in our show on, yes, the common law. Have a look at that. Go back into the archive and have a look at the articles and the shows in there. And indeed, the plan to rule the world, which is where everything was going, which has taken into COVID. I did that at the Glastonbury Symposium in 2019, and it's a great introduction to what's going on at the moment. Yes, it's a way to win over your enemies, possibly. But yes, every true consent supposes three things. This is consent: a physical power, a mental power, and a free and serious use of them. Well, we don't see much of that around us, do we? We see a lot of hive mind compliance. Hence it is that if consent be obtained by mediated imposition, circumvention, surprise or undue influence, it is to be treated as a delusion. So the people who are following the COVID action plan are deluded. They are under a delusion. They are not in their own minds. Important point that. So, for although the law will not generally examine into the wisdom or prudence of men in disposing of their property or in binding themselves by contracts or by other acts, yet it will not suffer them to be entrapped by the fraudulent contrivances, cunning or deceitful management of those who purposely mislead them. Well, that basically means that they are effed now, because we are being coerced into things on the back of a lie, on a fraud, and we're not being given due process or even having consideration or proper consent. So at the most basic level, the coercion is accompanied with lies and fraud. It's not a good mixture. What we are seeing is a soft tyranny. What we're seeing around us is a half-hearted dictatorship, really. There's no consistency to what is being imposed. The destruction of the sovereign is being done through very, very diabolical means. The need to get complete dependency upon the state through the global health security system, of which we have talked much, and of which none of the media in this country talks at all. It's very retarded and absolutely transparent in a lot of ways now what's going on. Even to people who didn't get it at first. It's quite interesting because on this social media, what I've noticed is that people who were thinking that what I was saying was a little bit depressing and dystopian before are now calling me a consultant. Strange how things change, isn't it? Yes, the need to get complete dependency is what this is all about. We have to be made to be dependent on the new global health security system and the social impact of all that, which is basically to be on universal basic income. Here's a good one. Injury caused by intentionally misrepresenting or concealing facts which are duty-bound and lawfully required is a fraud. And I keep using the F word, it's quite important. The current situation is based on fraud. Britain is currently lawless. Therefore, the impositions are morally and legally without standing and, in fact, are criminal. The intent is clear and proven, because the intent behind this is malevolent, which means guilty mind. So the globalists have guilty mind. Over the last year, we've proved this many times. Behind the facade, there is nothing of substance. The communitarians and do-gooders who have bought into this pantomime will melt down if they find out what the COVID action plan is all about. And I've been talking about this with people that I know. And I've said to people that I know that when these people who have so much invested in the state, who are walking around with masks, who are queuing up outside Waitrose, find out that they've been screwed over and they've got nothing left, they're going to get a bit neurotic. Not a good time to be around them. So, yeah, heading for the hills is a good idea if you can. Those with their beliefs invested in the religion of COVID will be destabilised to such an extent it will be worth keeping away from them for the fallout. Those who plan and react in real time will, I believe, find the necessary loopholes, which is what we're always looking for. The fact that every major global corporation has been invited on board through coercion or stimulation is a problem. Look at the Climate-Related Disclosures Fund. Yeah, we're going to be going back to that soon because COVID is merely a driver. And guess what? Climate change is another driver. They're just drivers of governance. Now, this is interesting. We brought this up the other week. The Vatican, with its nose in the trough of sustainable development, which is in reality a depopulation program and global control grid with biosecurity and DNA harvesting for a global health security system. Well, the Vatican have proved themselves to be beneath contempt, arch deceivers. Go to inclusivecapitalism.com. We covered this the other week, but do have a look at it. Read it and weep. They talk of aspirations for systematic change. It says, Council members make actionable commitments aligned with the World Economic Forum International Business Council's pillars for sustainable value creation, people, planet, principles of governance and prosperity, and all that advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, it is one big club after all, one big corporate club. The modern-day heretic has many acres of moral high ground, though, and can easily argue against the Pope and corporation, Vatican Inc. Over the past year, it's been pointed out on this show that what most, if not all, commentators in the UK avoid is basically the system that we're actually in. So the system we're in, the communitarian system, which is run under a technocracy, is never talked about. That is the system that we're in. So people still think that we're in democracy, which is very strange, actually, after 9 months of this. Over the past year, it's been pointed out on this show very many times, the so-called protest movements in the UK, for instance, are without exception intelligence operations. We've been proved right again, without much intelligence, though. There has unfortunately been proven by us, by the cancelling of a New Year protest by some space cadets of fake descent. Did you see that? Did you see that on social media? The space cadets of fake descent have cancelled a New Year's protest because guess what? There's going to be too many police and it's all over anyway. This is the nature of controlled opposition. It's bloody half-hearted, isn't it, really? The protest achieved nothing and are just a pointless distraction, a good cover for more important activity, though. Stuff that happens underneath the surface, which is important, which is small cells of people getting together and doing something. Check out North Idaho Exposed on YouTube. Check out our interview with Casey Whalen and Ammon Bundy. These are people who are standing up for their inalienable rights, and they are taking this battle to where they need to take it, to the local town hall, which is where you and everyone in this country needs to take it. The more important activity, yes, is forming small cells, your own local groups, not local action groups, though, because they're the ones that are run by the council and the change agents. You form your own. And, of course, this means keeping away from Facebook and keeping your plans off social media altogether. The very useless narcissists and dimwits who push themselves as the voice of the dispossessed will all soon be gone. Yes, the fake protest movements will all disappear soon. Their job is done. They led you nowhere. Now they're just going to let you down. The next phase depends entirely upon public compliance, as they say. Oh, that's it. Engage, inform, and then, guess what? Enforce. So what do the technocrats really want? Well, it's simple, isn't it? Depopulate, control and manage. But the main point here is, are they capable of making it fair and equitable? Well, of course not. The Climate-Related Disclosures Fund, pre and after COVID, is a globalist mafia out to bring down anyone who does not fully comply. So only compliant corporations are allowed. That was the whole point of our common future, the whole point of Agenda 21, to give the power to stakeholders. The big problem is that the Internet of Things, of course, needs the Internet. Not everything can be controlled. Agenda 2030 is a land grab of everything. The regulation and licensing of all and the restriction of every living human. Do these morons have any earthly right to do what they are doing? No, they don't. They've broken their contract, they have committed crimes and engaged in fraud. They have no standing in the real living world, which is why it's all cybersecurity and the global health security monitoring system. They have no standing in the real living world. Only in their delusion can they control. The Emperor's new clothes are not adequate anymore. No MP or any member of any party can or will do anything about it. If any of them actually knew how things work, they wouldn't be trying to solve it through political parties. This is actually known as the system of moods, the system of parties, the two lies. We have one party, but we are invited in only upon consenting to be used and then discarded. Only a fool would accept what is on offer. And there are no shortage of fools in the UK at the moment, unfortunately. But yes, we're going to be talking about Heresy in the coming weeks. The film is nearly finished. It's taken quite a long time due to the COVID action plan getting in the way, and also doing 5 days a week on an American radio station, which I've pulled back from for the time being. But yes, just to remind you, heretic meaning able to choose. Let's go back to papal bull Heretico Cobrendo 1401. The divers false and perverse people of a certain new sect, they make and write books, they do wickedly instruct and inform people. Well, that's what we should all be doing as heretics, instructing and informing people. There is nothing new in exercising control through assumed authority. Of course, we also had in 1539, something to sum up this section of the show, the Act of 6 Articles, formerly titled an Act abolishing diversity in opinions. Is it happening again? Yes, it is. We have many people abolishing diversity in opinions, or trying to. The corporate-owned world now does exactly the same thing. So that's my little rant over with for the first part of the show. I'm going to introduce my guest tonight, Eddie from Kentish Town. And we've been talking quite a lot over the past year with the Critical Thinking Group, which is Clive Menzies. And I got introduced to Eddie through Clive, and we've formed some interesting conversations around music, around the loss of creativity, and cycling.
Cycling, indeed.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark. Well, yeah, this is quite a strange one to bump into. I just came over for a beer and a mince pie, and then Mark's broadcasting. So here I am. But yes, cycling. I am a cyclist, and I spent quite a bit of time in Berlin, 5 years, and learned to really hate cyclists because in Berlin there's cycle paths everywhere, and the cyclists never stop for anybody. They just shout at people and say, get out of the way, blah, blah, blah. And what you find in Berlin is that the motorists are the most considerate people around. They sort of slow down because they're usually scared of hitting a bicycle of sorts. Anyway, what's been a bit disturbing of the movement forward with cycle lanes, particularly in London, and Mark's done a huge amount on Walthamstow, where I think it started.
That's right, it did, Eddie. I mean, that was around 2012 it really started getting going. By 2014 it was in full swing. The roads were being closed. They were enforcing their parking charges, and people were saying, oh, it's only £20 a year. I said, no, it won't be forever, that's just to entice you, to get you to believe that it's all about you getting your parking space. It's not about that. It's about control and management of you and your vehicles, and you've got everything tied down to the same address. And anybody with any sense knows that you never register your vehicle or your common law conveyance. I would say, Mark, I'm sorry to correct you there, but I don't drive vehicles, I drive common law conveyances. And we are winning, Mark. I've only lost 2 vehicles in the last 3 months, so they're backing off.
Well, welcome. Malcolm's in the room.
Yes, so it's great to have him around because it really reminds me of what I used to do. And it reminds me of the people I used to mix with who were going to relinquish all their birth certificate bonds and all the rest of it. But we are talking about cycling here. And really, when I saw this happening in Waltham Forest, it happened so quickly and with no public participation. And I told people what was coming. It all happened, and they still thought it was a conspiracy theory. Well, the problem they've got now is that they know it wasn't, and they can't do anything about it. And their properties are now going to be degraded through COVID. And all those people who thought Walthamstow was awesome Stow are now probably changing their mind. And of course, now it's happening in Kentish Town, isn't it, Eddie?
It's certainly, well, it's spreading through Camden and actually the whole of London. And myself and Clive were at some meeting in Islington, in front of Islington Council, a couple of weeks ago, and the same story has been put out by not even activists, just people concerned, people losing their livelihoods because the road's being cut off here, there, and everywhere. And one interesting thing I found out, which is about the new taxis that everybody's paying for, or they're not paying for because they're so expensive, but they come in at 60 grand, I think they are. But one guy pointed out that you aren't allowed to take one of these new electric taxis into a low vehicle zone, I think it's called, because they have problems with particulates from brakes and tyres. So I don't think anybody who's purchasing an electric vehicle at the moment knows that these are a problem that's going to be affecting where they can park, where they can drive in London, after spending all that money as well.
Yeah, electric cars are a complete waste of time because you can't go anywhere. I mean, I like getting in my camper van, or I did, and going wherever I want, and that can involve driving for 300 miles. Now, if you've got an electric car, you're going to have to refuel every 95 miles and find somewhere to plug the bloody thing in for a few hours. I mean, it seriously disrupts your journey, and of course, it's all about control, and it's like what you're saying. Of course, they were going about these tyre particulates years ago, and that's obviously another thing that's coming. I mean, you know, it's all related, isn't it? It's all related to my cat's got COVID, really, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's all the same bloody thing.
It is the same thing. Yeah, and well, there's also a big burning issue at the moment, which seems incredibly petty, but it's a sort of recharging post coming off a lamppost that they're starting to install all over London. So then, specifically, you have to have an electric car to be able to park in that one space. I don't even have a car, but I watch what's going on, and it just upsets me so much that people can't see what's being taken away. And once it's taken away, you can't get the thing back. So yeah, just all these things being driven through on the back of something which seems kind of almost quite soft in a way. Cycling, you know, these nice people. Well, apparently not, but these people that are peddling around, keeping fit or whatever. It's being used in another way to take certain freedoms away.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did where I used to live, and it's quite interesting. I'm just looking at the comments in chat actually. Psychopaths and psychopaths.
Yes.
Kath's saying that they are a nightmare. They ride 3 deep on roads over here. I don't know where Kath is at the moment, but wherever she is, they ride 3 deep. And yes, they do. I can vouch for that.
I don't.
Well, you're a sensible cyclist, Eddie. You know, you have a conscience. You know, they adopt a huge superiority complex on our roads.
Yeah.
Electric vehicles are a disaster on every level, says Kath. Yes, especially the batteries. Tyre particulates, says Monthly. Never knew there was such a thing they worried about. My neighbour has a new hybrid plug-in car. I've never seen them. Plug it in, though. Well, you've got to get spying on them. This is the communitarian big society, Monthly. If you don't know what your neighbours are doing, they could be getting up to anything. They could be going out into a Tier 4 situation in their vehicle.
They could be.
They could be, couldn't they? I mean, you know.
I have to say, around my area, I haven't seen anybody getting grassed up or any stuff happening. Although they did install some barriers, which they were saying were for social distancing, in front of this poor Asian grocer. And they just sort of blocked off his shop. And I said, did they speak to you? Oh, nothing. No, they never said a thing. And then he moved to the barriers to bring in some deliveries one day. And the council just appeared from nowhere and just said, if you move those again, you'll be charged £10,000 for moving our equipment. And it's just unbelievable. But there's no correspondence before that. Poor guy's bringing in some bags of toilet rolls or tins, and the council just appear, and this is it, bang, you know. And it's just it's they're gangsters, basically.
Yeah, well, this was always my point, you see, and I keep reiterating it. And the reason I reiterate it is because nobody talks about this. The answer to the Global Action Plan is local. It's in that town hall. It's in those council buildings. Those are the people who are trained under sustainable development, who are implementing this, who really don't know what they're doing. And these people, in my view, in my opinion, have to be targeted and brought to book properly. And this is something that people in this country don't seem to want to do. In America, they're doing it. Peoplesrights.org is doing it. They're getting demonised, of course, and the stories that get attached to them are the usual. Of course, the demonisation. But this demonisation, this kind of Saul Alinsky approach which they use, can be used back on them. And then you take the moral high ground because they haven't got any. And it's an interesting thing about this cycling. Yes, someone's just put in Shaun of the Living. He's put they see drivers as vermin who hate nature and children. This is how childish it all is, you see, because they don't realise that everything that they get from Waitrose comes in on the back of a lorry. They just don't get this at all. Yeah. And it's this disconnect which is being exploited. So what you do, you make people more stupid and more dependent, and then you start bringing in an ideology that they can all join in with, which is obviously to their detriment, which they don't even get. And that's the point. So, and it's all by consent. But the problem we have is that this is being imposed by the idiots around us. The idiots who are scowling at you in the street if you don't wear a mask and all this kind of stuff. It's very tedious, but having to deal with the public has become more of a problem under the COVID action plan because it's further divided them. It's kind of polarised. In a way, it's quite an interesting one because it's polarised them into two camps now, hasn't it? It's a little bit about Republican Democrat. It's people who know COVID is bollocks and those what don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny. A friend of mine said she was still listening to Russell Brand the other day, and yeah, exactly. But I put it on, and he was talking about masks, and he said exactly that. He said it was quite petty how it had been divided between us. But I was telling you earlier on a good note, because just before Christmas it was pretty depressing. I mean, the amount of people with masks on a daily basis in London was 90 to 10% sort of thing, you know, particularly if you have to go in the tube or something. But yesterday I was telling you, we went up Parliament Hill, and it was amazing. There was hardly anybody anywhere wearing masks, and I don't mean just on the hill, on the walk up there and everything. And I thought, this is quite interesting, particularly because we're in Tier 4. You know, so it's interesting maybe how the public are responding to these things. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that these things sort of wear off, don't they? Okay. The apathy sort of sets in quite quickly because everything's a fad these days. So the masks will be the same in a way. There are people who are in so much fear that they won't take the bloody things off, you know. But those are victims, really. Those are people who are being pounded by propaganda all day long through their own choice, through their own consent. They're watching it.
Just on a slight observation on these small family groupings, I have noticed that if you've got two children, a mother and a father, it's usually the father that's wearing the mask. I don't know why.
I've seen that, yeah.
Have you noticed that?
Yes, I have noticed that, especially around here today when we went out, yes.
Oh, maybe it's a North London thing.
Maybe it's a North London thing, yeah. But the whole thing is that they have to keep ramping this up. So obviously, we're not going to be getting any reprieve from this. It's going to be ramped up. As I was saying last week, I mean, I think that document from that Canadian whistleblower is absolutely spot on. It seems to be the timeline of what's happening. In other words, it's going to get ramped up, and there's going to be further lockdowns. And that's happening, right? They're now saying everyone's going to be in Tier 4, you know. But the whole absurd thing about this is that there are planes leaving the country and there are people driving about and there's nobody stopping you. So that is the point. So this is a psychological operation on the public. They are trying to limit access to things, making it more difficult to get to places and all the rest of it. And, of course, destroying all the businesses, as we know, for a very good reason, because they don't want anyone to be sovereign. And it's a very simple operation in a lot of ways, but also it's not very clever, and it's very much like the Saul Alinsky thing again. It's like it's constant pressure, destables, constant pressure. But how long can you do that for? Because it doesn't work unless there's some substance there, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to go off on a huge one, but my background is in the arts, and I've discussed it before with Mark, but about the whole thing of Dadaism and surrealism and how they used to use stuff to destabilize a situation, to actually make something you've never made before. Now, I don't want to go into a boring rant, but basically through the years, arts have kind of come back into something that's quite quantifiable, but it seems more and more governing powers are taking these sort of devices a bit like, last minute we'll just announce that no one can get on a train or no one can get on a plane, or you have to stand on one foot for the afternoon on Wednesday, and it's getting as mad as that, and it is really destabilizing most people's lives. People are finding it difficult to cope with and to come up with any response to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. I can see that it's affecting the mental health of a lot of people. I mean, I suppose the strange thing is that when I found about this stuff for the first time, when I started reading about it, I've already been freaked out to the extent that nothing really freaks me out anymore. And you just think, well, they're just doing this because of that, and it's
just
kind of...
Just on your
don't want to sound blasé, though.
Just on your point about mental health, though,
yeah.
I had to do something to read out some stuff to some students and staff a while ago, and it was interesting because I mentioned the thing that was on your programme. Now, you're going to have to remind me of his name. Jerry Marzinski?
Jerry Marzinski, yeah.
And that observation that he talked about, the media, the voices that are coming through the media, the messages that are coming through the media, he said we're very, very close to what the paranoid schizophrenics experience throughout their life, or how they described it to him. And it was funny when I mentioned it to this group of people. The response I got back was quite interesting, particularly from a lot of students. They got it, really got it, and I think your program bringing out these things and finding gems like that to actually insert into daily life is really important. I mean, that's why I'm a huge fan of Windows on the World.
Thanks, Eddie. Checks in the post. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's quite funny, actually, because, these observations, there's so many of them. I mean, I don't know where to go with this sometimes, because in a way a lot of the work has been done. I think with even the shows we put out this year, what more can we say? What more can you say about this? We've nailed what it is. Once you nail what something is and you know the system, then what do? You can keep outlining that, or you can then search for what you think might be solutions. Now, the solutions have to be imposed through people's own groups. Otherwise, it's a template, and a template won't work. But someone's just put into chat, actually, town halls are really big in America. Yes, they are, but that doesn't mean that they are less important here. It just means that people don't attend them as much. And this whole idea of usurping what they're doing, especially with the Delphi technique, if you've never heard of it, look it up, run on group consensus with facilitators, is actually fraud. What they're doing is steering you, and they are not disclosing what they're doing. They are psychologically steering people into an intended outcome, which is a con. It's a fraud, and it should not be happening. And I've got a kind of template that we've been using for that, and people use it. I get very encouraged by these small victories people have. Small victories are the stepping stone to bigger victories, and that's the way I see it. So, in other words, people saying, we're going to get this, we're going to get them all arrested, we're going to do... Wait, no, that's not going to happen. The small victories will lead to bigger things, and they will lead to acts which will become revolutionary. And by that, I don't mean the revolutionary spirit. I mean really taking something forward and changing things. And I honestly do think that can happen, but the level of apathy in the UK and the level of entitlement that people still have is a huge problem, because they still have a plasma screen, and they still have supermarkets full of food, and they still have some money to buy it with. Now, there's not much to the tipping point, and that tipping point is being observed more and more. So I think that this is an interesting situation, but I think more and more it's a test of morality and intellect.
One of the really interesting things, just coming back to the town hall thing as well, was just some of the speakers that were in front of the microphone, in front of the town hall. One of the phrases that came out, which I thought was really powerful, was what was going on in London was a form of urban colonialism. And when people start using these words, it's a bit like you're talking about taking a phrase that's being used on us and then pushing it back out there of what people are doing to us as well. And the other really good point I thought that came out, someone said, was that people have forgotten that London is not just this bunch of residential villages, it's a working city. And so all these people that are complaining about traffic going through A, B, and C, actually that is a city that's breathing and living, and they just want to stop it. They can't make the connection at all.
No, and I think this is a really important point, Eddie, because it's a conceptual thing. The thing is, if you look at these technocrats like Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, they are very clinical in the way they approach things. They have been basically mollycoddled through their life, and they've been part of these organisations. They think in a conceptual way. These aren't practical people. They're not practical at all. In fact, if you left them in the middle of nowhere, they wouldn't be able to fend for themselves. And this is the interesting thing, because their world depends on electricity and the Internet of Things. If they haven't got that, their world doesn't exist. The new system does not exist without electricity. Now, that's quite interesting, I think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, that dependency on that. And one of the other things that's coming through, actually, a lot of broadcasters, a lot of internet broadcasters are saying this year they need to start getting out and speaking to people much more than sitting in a room broadcasting all the time. And I know a lot of them try to do that, but they're just saying, well, we've got an audience, but actually it needs to be wider, and it needs to be on a day-to-day basis, about talking about your dog shitting in the park or going for a walk or something like that. These are the things that also bond us, not just huge ideas and other conspiracies that are going on.
Well, exactly. And having spent years doing that, and as part of my education in a way, you get very addicted to information. I mean, my interaction with the public was always through what I did. So I was self-employed and I was engaging with the public. Now, actually, I find engaging with the public rather tiresome most of the time now. And I've become a bit sort of wary of getting involved, because the arguments put back are so limited. And once you reach a certain level with this stuff, you can't go back. And it's quite difficult, because when you get people that are very sort of less than entry level, or they're just completely brainwashed, it's very, very difficult. And this goes back again to this gaslighting by the media, which is like, as you were saying, the paranoid schizophrenic hearing the voices, because that is what it is. When you turn that television on, it's pretty evil, because what they're doing is they've got this narrow vocabulary which is instructing you to think in this communitarian way all the time. And it's quite sickening. And when you hear even your own relatives going, well, we've all got to do our bit, we're all in it together, it's like a nightmare. You think, oh my God, they're doing it now, you know.
Well, on that point, I think what an interesting thing that's happened personally to me is close friends and family, that when this first started, I found it very difficult to say anything but, oh God, of course it's a problem, the collapse in the economy, it's this, and there was just a silence on the other end of the phone most of the time to the family. And of course, to keep your relationship going, particularly to close friends and family, you have to drop that after a while. And I've come to the stage that there's no point in just droning on about it. But what I'm finding now is that they are priming the questions back. They're going, oh yeah, they are pushing us this way, aren't they? And I find it quite hopeful in a way that it's slightly, people are coming back and sort of saying they are noticing things. I mean, obviously terrified, like all of us in a way, but it is being picked up on. At what speed? I don't know. I fear that, but I do feel there is movement at least, and that's an important thing.
I don't think they've taken a lot of things that are very important into consideration about the unpredictability factor, because these people are very kind of monotonous in the way they look at things. They're basically plodders in a way. They're not great thinkers. They've just got this kind of very sort of methodical way of looking at things and predicting outcomes. Well, that can work, and it has worked with things like the climate change agenda, which is basically gaslighting through the idea that we're a scourge on the planet and all the rest of it, and we have to be removed. And there's 2 or 3 generations who now reiterate that at every bus stop in the country if they take their masks off. This is the point. So when you have that level of indoctrination, you probably think, if you're a globalist, that we've got the cat in the bag. Well, actually, I don't think they have, because I don't think this system's going to work. And I've been talking to someone very close to me who's a friend who's been through a lot of this Saul Alinsky stuff and been a victim of it with her own business. And we both come to this conclusion that this doesn't really have what it takes to cut the mustard in the long run. I don't think it'll work, because they haven't factored in enough. It's the question. The question is, what do they want from it? Okay, control and management of population and depopulation. Okay, but that's always kind of happened in a way, right? So they're just trying to do it without creating wars or going in and destroying countries. But it's not very well thought out. Having looked at this for a long time, I thought it was a diabolical plan, and it was a kind of genius in a way when I first looked at sustainable development and how they presented it. But now I don't, because it's kind of worn off and it's got too obvious what's happening. It's like what's happening here. Do you know what I mean? Like where you see the bicycle thing in the middle of the road, which is clearly there to block the road. Do you know what I mean? Like this sort of stuff is clearly not what it appears to be. And when something is not what it appears to be, then it has to be looked at and go, well, what is it really about then? Because it's clearly not about what they're saying it's about. And it's the same with anything. COVID cycling, or, the Global Action Plan, the Global Health Security System.
And I mean, you look at this stuff, and a lot of people, I'm sure, that listen to you look at this stuff a lot during the week. If you think about, you don't look at any of this stuff, and you're being bombarded with it every day of the week. How the hell do you cope with it? I mean, maybe it is by just being silent and sort of laughing it off. Not even laughing it off, but just looking a bit depressed about the thing, because it is a difficult situation. I did want to add to that whole thing about just having pointless conversations with your neighbours and stuff, which are not always pointless. But a good friend of mine who you mentioned, Clive and Alex Nikolov, they've been working on this tokenization thing, because I know you've discussed this idea of alternative currencies and alternative ways of actually trading or moving some sort of, for want of a better word, cash between each other, which sounds like it is going to become incredibly important the more that we're squeezed, and it all looks like they're going to get rid of cash as quickly as they can. I think these are really important. A lot of people working hard behind stuff to try and come up with some ideas of trading, and actually, which is another way of communicating as well, a very important way of communicating, because we have to eat and live,
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking at chat actually while you were saying that, and it's like any form of modelling or planning, garbage in, garbage out. And we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, why is Neil Ferguson still in a job? Well, we know why he's still in his job, because he's a useful idiot for these tyrants. But this is absurd now, isn't it? I mean, this computer modelling on this, everything to do with COVID, is beyond a joke. How can they still try to push it as though it's got credibility?
Well,
that's insane, isn't it?
Apparently he is the guy behind this Tier 4 sort of thing.
Yes.
And apparently the SAGE committee, who God knows who they all are, but actually didn't vote to go into Tier 4 on the back of this new strain. But it was pushed through anyway.
Yes.
The notes that have come out of the meeting seem to indicate that. So, I mean, again, there's no point in asking why the media aren't asking about this, but there you go.
Not at all. That's the whole point. There's not really any use in getting into that conversation
No.
about them. But I think that's great. I think we should round it up for tonight, Eddie, and wish everybody a happy new year,
Happy New
if
Year.
that's possible. And remember that tears are only in your mind, the windmills of your mind. So get out, defy it, and be naughty. And we'll see you all again soon. And there's plenty of stuff coming up. Thanks to everyone who supports the show. If you want to help us out on Patreon, please do. The film's I promise, going to be out soon. We're going to be doing a special on that with the lady who wrote, composed and performed some of the music for the film. We've got an amazing soundtrack for the film The Heretics of London. That's why it's kind of taken longer, because the project's grown. In fact, we could make several films out of what we've got, but it's so prescient to what's going on at the moment. It is very similar to what was happening with the persecution of heretics in the Middle Ages, and those people who are heretics are able to choose, which is what the original meaning of heretic is. So that's it from me and Eddie tonight, and thanks a lot everyone in chat. See you soon on Windows on the World. Thanks a lot for listening.